This is the Lutheran Education Podcast, a bi-weekly podcast where we explore issues, trends, and events surrounding Christian education with your hosts, Richard Schumacher, Senior Director of Operations at LSCM, and Dr. Tracy Salgado, Director of Special Education at LSCM.
And welcome to the Lutheran Education Podcast, brought to you by Lutheran Special Education Ministries. We are back once again with Dr. Kim Marxhausen. Last episode was just so good that we had to spread it out into two episodes talking about the anxious generation. I'm your host, Richard Schumacher, Senior Director of Operations at LSCM. And Kim, welcome back. Thanks again for hanging out with us for a second episode.
Oh, LSEM is one of my favorite organizations because the work that you do is just so important. And so that's why I'm willing to come and talk even with you, Rich.
I definitely appreciate that. Now, Kim, quick question. I mean, you're out in Nebraska, and we talk a lot about Michigan versus Nebraska athletics and kid each other, and that's great. But let's try to find some common ground. Who's your favorite NFL team, if you have one?
We have no NFL teams close to us,
Is
Rich.
there,
In Nebraska,
there's one just a
Cornhusker
few hours
football is
south there
it.
in Kansas City, is there not?
There is Kansas City. I'd probably, because I have enough friends who are Chiefs fans, would have to pick them. Am I in the doghouse with that too?
Absolutely not. My first call was to Grace Lutheran in Kansas City, Kansas, back in the mid 90s. So I am a Chiefs fan, and everyone thinks that I'm like a fair weather Patrick Mahomes, Swifty Chiefs fan, and I am not. I'm a long-suffering, 30 plus years Chiefs fan.
Good.
I figured the Chiefs would make perfect sense for a Nebraska fan because it's the same colors. You can buy one sweatshirt, it
Yeah.
works Saturday and Sunday, and you don't have to change your palette to anything that's different.
It's the easy drive to the stadium too.
And again, don't even get me started on the tailgate because the barbecue in Kansas City is otherworldly. It's just
There you
phenomenal.
go.
All right. But we're not here to talk about football. We're not here to talk about tailgates, although that would be a good, if we could combine last conversation about snack time with like burnt ends, I think we could be onto something there.
We do an annual rib fest at our church that we get about 1,000 people a year come to. So yeah, I could talk barbecue.
And we do LSCM Sundays where we go out to various churches and talk about our ministry. I could try to schedule myself in on that particular weekend if possible. I'll have my people reach out to your people and we'll see what we can get figured out.
All right.
All right.
We
So
can
in
make
our
you a
in our
judge.
say again.
We can make you a judge.
Oh, that would be great. You're gonna have to make sure that everybody makes a lot extra though, because I make my decisions very carefully and very intentionally, and I take a lot of time and a lot of bites
And
to.
again, you don't want your trainer hearing about how many ribs you might eat at our rib fest.
No, actually, I think I would bring him with me.
Okay.
He would sign up for that part of it too. Love some good old meat. All right. We're talking about The Anxious Generation. This was the book written by Dr. Jonathan Haidt, released back in 2024. And Kim, you've been, as you said, you're working on teaching a class, I guess, that's got a basis for this. Is that correct?
No, the class I'm teaching is an honors class for college students on expertise and creativity.
Got it.
And
Got it.
but just because of the way my brain works, anything in my life overlaps with educational psychology. So
See
we
it.
make it work.
And my brain's still thinking about that barbecue we were just talking about, so
Yeah.
I need to get it together here. So we'll go ahead and do that. But anyway, as we talk about the anxiety that stems that we've been seeing stemming from the increased use of technology, smartphones, social media, all those different things, we're seeing a lot of impacts on our kids, and we talked in our last episode about a lot of those different things, but. I want to start specifically today about parent use for technology. One of the things that we finished the last one on was this whole idea of even though we're an adult and we have our own level of comfort when it comes to the world and our brain has stopped developing for some of us many years ago because we've just reached that age where we're beyond that. the impact that technology use can still have is definitely there. Not maybe for us so much, but it certainly impacts our relationships with other people around us,
Mhm.
not the least of which with our spouse, our families, and our children. So as we jump back into the conversation here, what do you see as the biggest impacts of adults using technology, especially around their kids and grandkids?
Well, and I want to be specific about this. Adults using technology indiscriminately,
Okay.
because it's not our goal to lay guilt on grandparents or parents. So instead, what I'd love to see in homes is parents having the discernment and teaching the discernment to their child about when and how much and in what ways we use technology that are healthy. And that can always start with a faith lesson, because technology is a gift from God. And because we are sinners, we manage to turn any gift from God into something that's harmful. And so we just need to be aware of that and to be actively teaching that to our children and our grandchildren. And often that means saying something out loud. And so you send a strong message if your child comes into the room and you put the phone down and start to interact with them. But you also have a strong message when you say to your child, I've been on the phone too much. I think I'm going to turn my phone off for a couple of hours. What do you think about that? Or, just being intentional about those kind of rules. We've been playing this video game inside. Let's go outside and toss a baseball around or a football around for a while. Constantly giving them other ideas so that they're not growing up thinking the screen is everything about who I am.
It's
But
interesting how
yeah.
it's interesting how we are so unwilling to do that. And oftentimes it's because, well, we have to be accessible. If something were to happen, someone's got to be able to get a hold of me. I have
Hmm.
to be accessible. And again, that's the phone part of it. But as I
Right.
had mentioned in the last episode, it's not a phone. It's a personal computer. And
Hmm.
for those of us who are old enough to remember back when phones and computers were two completely different things, uh, you could, under the circumstances, walk away from your computer. And if the phone rang, you still would go answer it and pick it up. It cracks me up today to see, again, I think back to when I was a child in school and I was being taught phone etiquette because we had that. You learned how to write your name on an envelope and you learned how to use the library card catalog. You learned phone etiquette, how
Hmm.
many times you let it ring before you hang up, because this was even before answering machines. I'm really quite old, I guess. So we were taught all of these different things as just kind of this is what's considered socially appropriate. Nowhere do I know that we really ever teach that, especially not in schools nowadays, but I don't see that really anywhere. I mean, what a simple thing it is to say when someone enters in the room, turn your phone off, set it down, put it away.
Hmm.
Put it in your pocket or put it out of reach so that way, you don't have that habit, that habitual, I have to grab my phone because I feel like I've got a short window of time that isn't being filled by some sort
By
of
something, yeah.
stimulus.
Well,
So
and it's interesting that you say put the phone out of reach, because recently I read about some research where they had students in three different settings. One setting was, well, it was two different settings. One setting, the student had the phone in their pocket, and in another study, the phone was just a little bit further away from them. Like here in Nebraska now, you can't have your phone on in a classroom, but they have those plastic things on the wall, so you stick your phone in a pocket when you
got
come
it,
into
got it, yeah.
class. Well, those students that phone was further away did better on tests than those students whose phone were in their pocket. So even when they know the phone is on them, it is a part of their brain, and their brain is saying, we've got to pay attention for that buzz, or we need to be checking that phone again. So I think that's an important piece of research for parents and teachers to know that that thing that's they really need for contact with their parents needs to be further away.
Yeah. I mean, I will catch myself. I'm out in the yard doing yard work during the summer, and uh, my wife, when she's out doing yard work, she'll leave her phone in the house because, again, when it comes to ladies' fashion, phone pockets just aren't really a thing, and she's tired of her phone falling out of her pocket, so she leaves in the house. I have my phone on me because that's the timepiece. That's what time is it? So
Mhm.
I will pull it out periodically, see what time it is. But invariably, when I pull it out, am I just looking to check the time? Well, no, you see, because now I've got a notification that
Mhm.
somebody sent me a message on Twitter or X or whatever they call it now. So I should just check that real quick. And then I'm in the rabbit hole. It's
Yeah.
so easy to fall into that rabbit hole because it's there and it's convenient. If I leave my phone in the house, I don't give it a second thought. So the lesson is I need to buy a clock for outside in the garage so I know what time it is without having to have my phone with me. But again, it's just so easy to fall into that rabbit hole and so important to model that that's not the most important thing.
Well, and that brings up an important issue too about phones at bedtime or iPads at bedtime, because we have pretty clear research on that um, children, and this goes all the way through high school, should have at least an hour of time away from a screen before they go to bed. Here's a huge aspect of screen use that's causing anxiety, because not only are you checking on those notifications and in your brain you're thinking I've got to check everything and make sure that there's not something going on there, but you're telling your brain that this is more important than
Yeah.
relaxing and slowing down and getting to sleep. And so then when you try to go to sleep, your brain says, well, what about the phone? And so making that a practice that the phones are completely off for at least an hour before bedtime makes a huge difference then in sleep habits.
And again, I think the value that is of modeling that from the parents to the child is also very important.
Mhm.
Uh, Again, family unit, spending that time together. We've got so many other things that are demanding our time or tempting us away from the things that help to build the strong family unit. Uh, my wife and I are going through this now because we're now this is year 3 of empty nesting. Our youngest is a junior in college, and so our schedule is far more our own than it ever used to be because our daughter, our youngest especially, she was active in everything. There wasn't a night where she didn't have a sporting event or a practice or a drama event or something to go. She just was wired to I've got to go, I've got to do, I've got to be a
Mhm.
part of it. And so the last few years now, we've kind of experienced the difference because we now have time that we never had before. Well, how are we going to choose to fill that time
Mhm.
becomes a really critically important thing. For some, we can get those projects done around the house that we never had time for, or we can take up a new hobby, or we can go and experience some things that we want to do as opposed to just simply following the school bus to the next volleyball match. Or we can get home at night and turn on the television to watch what's on the DVR while we play on our phones and rewind the DVR several times because did you see that? I missed that. What was
Yeah.
that there? Oh, I was in the middle of a game. That's that's not taking advantage of that. That's actually again falling into a deeper hole with those ramifications. And again, when your kids then come home and see that that's what their parents are now doing, what they're involved in, it sends a message that, well, that's what family life is. And now it's kind of okay for the next generation to start off with that really bad image.
And what that makes me think of is the development of social skills. Because obviously, if as a part of a family you are on a screen most of the time and sometimes on two screens, you're not developing social skills.
Mhm.
Um, but at the same time, parents will often use those kinds of screens as a way of keeping their kids from fighting and arguing with each other.
Sure.
But what they need to do is fight and argue with each other. And I don't mean to say that parents need to encourage fighting and arguing because kids will do that enough on their own, but they need to realize what the benefit of that is.
Mhm.
Because I remember as a kindergarten teacher doing a parent-teacher conference, one of the first things I would start talking about with parents is how well their children get along with others one-on-one and how well they get along with others one to a group, right? We would start talking about that first because I would want them to see that connection between good social skills and good learning. And invariably, if I was talking to a parent and saying, oh, your child really does well on one-on-one communication and they get along well with others, I would look up and the parent would be like slumped in their seat and just so relieved. And I would say, why are you so relieved? Well, because my child fights with his brother all the time, or my child argues with me all the time. And I would have a chance to say, because you allow that to happen and you show them how to deal with it, they've gotten it not just out of their system, but they've learned ways of interacting in a healthy way. And then that's what shows up in the classroom. But the more time these kids are spending in front of a screen, the less experiences they're having with not only having fun with siblings and friends, but solving problems and getting into trouble with them.
So, where are we at in terms of students who are really impacted by this growing up into adults? Because again, when you think back, all the things that we would see happening that was impacting our kids in schools, we then as educators would see that next wave when those kids became the parents.
Mhm,
And you would see the behaviors in the parents based on those kids. And again, as a veteran educator, you look back and say, yep, that
mhm,
that's the kid from 20 years ago who was dealing with that issue then, and now their mom, now their dad, and that same issue is now impacting the next generation. What if you had to put a timeline on that? Are we there yet with parents starting to come into the classrooms who have been impacted by this? And what are some of the telltale signs?
Well, this has been one of the new speaking requests that I've had in this last year. I've had people putting together conferences wanting me to come and talk about Gen X and Gen Y parents and Gen X and Gen Y teachers. And we're especially seeing this in early childhood because that's those generations typically have early childhood age children.
Mhm.
But we're getting parents who um, don't understand how to create relationships. And because they've spent so much of their time on social media, they haven't had that rich level of experiences. So they're not developing the kind of relationships they need as a parent with other school parents. And they hesitate in being able to teach their children how to have healthy relationships too. They also, because they see so much online that's curated, when we have social media, we curate it. You're not going to put up a video of something that's that you think nobody's going to want to watch. You're not going to put up a picture of something that you failed. They've seen everything be perfect. They start to assume their children need to be perfect too. And they panic if they find out that they're not. So this is creating problems in parent-teacher conferences, which should be the safe place to talk to a parent about a need that their child has,
Mhm.
because the parent and the teacher, you're a team to help this child. Instead, we have parents who are in a panic about their child needing anything or not being perfect in anything. So yeah, we're starting to see that already.
And I don't know, that's alarm bells in my
Hmm.
mind because with the parents coming into the classrooms now and couple that with some of these parents that are showing up now, if they've had kids who also got the double whammy of the impacts of the COVID-19 shutdown and all of the different things that has affected us in that regard, that's an awful lot of strikes against some of these students who need that extra support that can best only come from that personal interaction.
Hmm.
But when we still have speech teachers who are doing their speech lessons virtually, because the district figured out that it's cheaper to be able to do that because we're not paying mileage and we're not hiring more people because one person at a terminal can get a lot further around than if they had to go out in actual case. That's just compounding those problems, which makes the next generation to come when they
Mhm.
hit parenthood, it's concerning.
And there's some good news that comes along with this too, because whenever I'm talking about a generation, I like to show people a picture of a bell curve because we can imagine that, that I say something about Gen X or Gen Y, then that means that applies to everyone who's in that generation, and it certainly does not.
Sure.
It applies to that just the middle part of that bell curve. So it applies to a lot of different people, but there's far more people where it doesn't apply. And so then we can look at, well, why didn't everybody who is Gen X or Gen Y end up in this kind of an extreme in terms of developing people skills? Well, there's ways to intervene. So if you are in a classroom where you use fewer screens and you have teachers who are getting you to work together in teams, that's going to be a positive impact. If you've got parents who say, we're going to go to church every week, and that's going to be 2 hours every week where you are not on your phone and I'm not on my phone. That has a huge impact too, not just those 2 hours every week, but the message that you're teaching. So that reminds us that there are ways that we can prevent this or that we can make it a little bit better.
We're talking with Dr. Kim Marxhausen here on the podcast, discussing the anxious generation and the impacts that smartphones and social media and all these things have had on the development of our children. Earlier, you had mentioned how kids were kind of bringing some of their own solutions to this. You had mentioned one app, I think it
Mhm.
was Brick. I think you
Brick
said,
is an actual thing.
oh, it was an actual brick.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen pictures of it.
Okay.
I've been to the promised land, Rich, and I've come back. We have it is an actual thing, and so you touch your phone to it and it will turn off whatever apps you've told it to turn off. And so
Wow.
then if you are away from the brick, you can't reactivate them.
Yeah, so it's a dead zone then, I guess. I
Hmm.
mean, that's
The opposite of a hotspot.
yeah. which which again, it seems like it's extreme, but the hook is as strong as it is.
Hmm.
Perhaps something like that is what's necessary, and then once the person is away from it, then they can experience that life is better. You were talking about church just a moment ago. The church that I attend was built in the I think early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And so this particular building, they built the building and they put dirt and grass around much of the building. So if you walk up to it, there's like a slope that comes down from where the windows are at. I don't know, was this designed to be better insulation, keep a heating and cooling cost down, or was it a Cold War response? The dirt will save us from the bomb. I don't know. What I do know is Wi-Fi in that particular part of the world and with the dirt packed around the building is terrible.
Mm.
You can't get a signal. So even if I'm in Bible class and I'm trying to Google something relevant to the discussion, spin, 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 doesn't come. So I've gotten into the habit of I don't want this thing in my pocket for the next couple of hours because it's useless to me. It's not really effective to do anything. And I'm at church, so I just leave it in the little cubby tray of the door of my car. And I
Mhm.
don't even take it into church with me. And I'm not bothered by that. I can
Yeah.
worship and go to Bible class and all that. And if there's absolutely something that I must look up, well, someone else will look it up. I can just
Mhm.
say, hey, I didn't bring my phone in. Can someone check that or whatever? And the sun rises and the sun sets
Yes.
and life goes on. It's this amazing thing. But when given the opportunity, I do think that the next generation of kids can figure out what they need to be able to avoid those things, like this brick idea or whatnot. So as you've thought about this, what do kids need to do to counteract this trend? How can they advocate for themselves to not continue falling down the same rabbit hole that, say, my generation and the generations between me and our kids now have fallen trapped to.
Well, the most promising thing that I see in the college students that I teach is that they'll talk about being aware of what's happening. And just recently overheard a conversation. It's a seminar class, so they're doing a lot of discussion. So I feel like I'm giving them a healthy 3 50-minute periods a week where they're discussing with each other. But they were talking about the new version of AI that does the videos. And they were talking about how they're able to, at this point, figure out if that's an AI video because they'll get one of a cat, for instance, jumping off of a fence. And if that video gets attention, then AI puts out 10 more of different animals jumping over a fence
Yep.
to get the attention. And so I like that aspect of starting to teach children very young what's the difference between technology and me? What's the difference between spending time on the computer? How does that make me feel? And playing outside for recess. These are good conversations that we can have even before social media gets to be an issue, to be more aware of how we feel when we're doing something that's embodied.
So it seems like the key to this then is just having conversations about it, asking questions about it, seeing what the group feels about it, and letting the group then determine for themselves, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense, because the 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 richness is in the conversation. And
That's
you get
right.
to hear the people's opinions and perspectives, and then the group can come to consensus, which going all the way back to the very initial concern here was that we're losing touch of the connectivity interpersonally through technology. So it goes right back to that same basic solution of if we just connect as people,
Mhm.
even young people, we can identify, yeah, that's probably not good. And hey, this is a better way to do it. And let's try that. And if that works out, great. If it doesn't, we'll adjust from there.
Well, let's look at that kind of example in terms of a middle school lesson. So we could teach middle schoolers, here's the problems with technology, A, B, C, and D. We could have, a nice interactive PowerPoint, maybe do one of those little quiz things and everything on there.
Mhm.
And that's not going to work its way into their brain because they're enjoying what they're doing on the social media. But if you take that group and have them work on a project together where they're not on the screen at all, and then when the project's done, stop them and ask, what were you feeling when you were doing this? How did you feel when your group had a problem? How did you solve that? These are not the typical questions that we as teachers would ask after that, but I think it's what we need to now so we can get them to understand the difference between doing something on a screen and doing something in real life. And the emotion that we're working towards here is something that's called flow. So flow is something that was discovered by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And I like to pronounce that name, first of all, because he's no longer alive. So if I'm pronouncing it wrong, he won't know. But also to pronounce it because in my head, I always think if I could remember how to spell that name, it would be the best password ever. But his whole career as a psychologist was to study creativity. And he discovered the sense of flow. And flow, if you look on, at a picture of emotions set out, you would see that flow is exact opposite of anxiety. So when I'm in a state of flow, it means my brain is really firing on all cylinders, to use an old phrase.
Okay.
Everything about my brain is working on what I'm working on. And so that can happen when we are in groups of people. Like if you're playing on a basketball team, you're probably in a sense of flow because you are very quickly able to take in the information about what's happening in the game and apply it and to make it work in what your reaction is going to be when somebody tosses you the ball. That's a state of flow. That's why that embodied experience can reduce anxiety. But you can get a state of flow in a classroom if they're working on a project too. You can get a state of flow outside at recess, playing a really great game of kickball or whatever they're liking to play outside right now, because it uses up all of your brain, and it's using your brain in the way God intended it to be used.
So
So
to
that's something that I would recommend to teachers and parents, is to look for those kind of experiences where you feel like your family is in that moment and nothing else matters.
and
You're
when you
doing
recognize
something
that,
where
stay
if a
with it.
tornado buzzer went off, you would ignore it because you're so deep into it.
Nice. Yeah, and again, you can't necessarily predict what those are going to be,
Mm-mm.
but when you recognize it, jump into it, stay with it, ride that wave out until it comes to an end, so that way, you can have that experience for as long an opportunity as possible.
Right. And you're teaching your brain and your children's brain how to reduce anxiety. So that becomes a feeling that your brain remembers. And then later, when your child's in school and they're doing a math test and they're feeling anxious about it, the brain can recall that experience of being in flow. And like you said, we can't predict it, but we can make it much more likely to happen.
And I'm willing to bet that if you or I were to think back upon our own childhood and some of the greatest memories that we have with our family, chances are they just fall into the category of flow that you just described for us.
Right.
Those are the memories that are sustained. Those are the good old days to which we long for. We just maybe didn't have the proper terminology for them.
Yeah, the camping events that you've done, or watching sporting events, especially if someone in the family is on the team, going to a museum or the library, whatever it is your family likes to do, bike riding, those kind of things are the things that put you in flow. And the rewiring that's happening in the brain is a very healthy kind of rewiring.
And probably not too many times where it was just this was the greatest game of words with friends I've ever played.
Right. Well, and you can think about taking real life things and making them technology too, because my husband worked for the engineering department at the university. He was not a professor, he was support staff. But I remember in the early 2000s him coming home and saying, the professors are all complaining about the students. They say that the students know everything about computers, but they can't design. And I remember saying to him, yeah, because let's see, these students were 5 or 6 years old, they were doing Legos on computer instead of playing with real Legos.
Right.
And so that's a good thing to remember. When are you doing things that are real, where you're actually building something, or you're actually doing something where you might make a mistake and have to try it over again? That's the experiences where flow is likely to happen. And it will happen even if you're making mistakes. And that seems so odd, but it's because your brain is so focused on what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, this is a good place to take a quick break. So we're going to go ahead and do that, and we'll continue the conversation with Dr. Kim Marxhausen on the other side. But first, this word from LSCM. You're listening to the Lutheran Education Podcast, brought to you by Lutheran Special Education Ministries.
Thank you for listening. If you like what you hear today, please consider sharing our podcast with friends and colleagues in the industry. Again, thank you for listening to the Lutheran Education Podcast.
And welcome back to the Lutheran Education Podcast, brought to you by Lutheran Special Education Ministries. Dr. Kim Marxhausen is blessing us with her time and expertise as we talk about the effects that we have seen in our kids and in our world when it comes to anxiety, and how technologies, smartphones, and all those different stimuli have impacted it. Uh, so, quick question for you, Kim. When folks criticize Dr. Haight's work here, his book, um, I assume he has a doctorate. Maybe I just gave it to him
Yes, he
myself.
does.
Perfect. I was nervous I might have just bestowed upon him an honorary doctorate. LSM doesn't have the ability to do that. Um, so some of the criticism that the work has received has been, he's got an overemphasis on smartphones as being the problem, and there's not a lot of science behind this, which I think if anyone's listened to this conversation, you've debunked that one pretty effectively because everything you've brought has been based on
Hmm.
this is the data and it's showing it. Um, but they're also criticizing this in terms of the solutions that he offered in the book were questionable. Just limiting access, okay, that's a great solution, but is that really gonna affect this here? And then we should be doing a better job of just focusing on teaching digital literacy as opposed to taking the phones away, despite the fact that the research says that being away from screens does have positive benefits. So when you hear some of the criticisms that Haight's book has received over that, what are your initial thoughts when it comes to the claims that they're making and the basis that they're making them on?
Well, I found it interesting when I read the book. If I'm going to read a book like that, I'm going to read it from the viewpoint of a methodologist because that's just how nerdy I am.
Sure.
And I appreciated the way he used research in there. I thought he did it very well. Now, when you write a book like that, where you are summing up a lot of different research, the likelihood that you draw a wrong conclusion is pretty strong. So I would say, yeah, probably some of the things he said in there are not correct, but he used research very well. He always made sure he had multiple studies. He relied on the meta-analysis, which is a new study that's done on a bunch of other studies. And that's a very strong kind of research for us to pay attention to. So I think that's been good. Yeah, he does focus a lot on smartphones, but then again, that's the easy thing. That's the low-hanging fruit.
Sure.
And so that's what you put into a book. And the book's already 400 pages. So, who's going to read it if you add in another 200 pages for it? But what I found to be really fascinating was his chapter on spirituality, because it started with him saying, I am not a person of faith, but he recognizes that spirituality is important. So, what kind of spirituality is he talking about then? He's talking about just a secular idea of how we develop what we understand in the Bible as being fellowship. He just doesn't have the word to say it. And fellowship is the fact that we are humans and we come together. We have something that's alike about us. We worship the same God. We're saved by the same Savior. We're encouraged by the same Spirit, but we're also unique and individual within that group. And so God uses us in so many ways to do his work in the left-hand kingdom. That's what Dr. Haight can't explain. And that's the wonderful gift that we have as we look at this technology, which, as I mentioned before, is a gift from God,
Mhm.
but we can turn it into something that's harmful. What we want to do is we want to go back to that idea of fellowship, and we want to go back to our understanding of how God created us. And the first thing, of course, is he created us to be in fellowship. He created us to learn and do everything in our life with each other. So we're not single animals, we're social animals.
Mhm.
And so if we focus on that and if we make that the most important thing, then we are going to easily be led to by the Spirit to the solutions that we need in our families and in our classrooms.
Yeah, because it's evident just from Genesis, there wasn't a helper suitable for Adam.
Hmm.
That's the whole that's the whole genesis, no pun intended, of there being, man and woman, husband and wife, marriage, and a family unit. That came about,
Right.
very early on, and it wasn't because God made a mistake. it was because he understood that this was something that was going to be needed
Yeah.
and established that, the Sabbath day. He understood that rest from work, whatever that work would
Mhm.
be, was necessary and needed. And again, entertainment is part of how we might choose to recreate these days, but there's still it needs to be a rest or a break from that. Too much of anything obviously is going to create problems, and having that balance is there. And I think that's what God's trying to show us. Worship does that. The ability to leave our day, leave our work, leave our life, needs, and come together with a body of believers who can pray for one another, encourage one another, build one another up. Just yesterday, I was visiting a school up in northern Michigan, sat in on their devotion. They invited me to join their staff devotions, and love doing so. And they're reading from a book, and they read something in there which I had never thought of. And it was a really simple concept. I mean, I was open enough to admit to everybody, I am today years old, and that
Mhm.
concept really just hit me for the first time. And I could get a sense from some of the people in there of the, really? This is the one you got, but they didn't make me feel that way. They let me kind of explain it and talk about it, and then supported that. But if I'm not at that staff devotion, which I didn't need to be, I got there early to do it, not to give myself credit, but I wanted to be in connection with this faculty, and through that, God gave me something I needed to hear yesterday, and now I've got this new thing added. But I could have just as easily decided, I'm gonna stay at the hotel and have my breakfast and scroll on my phone at Facebook to see whatever else is going on in the world, and nobody would have faulted me. But
Yeah.
it's there, and there's such value from connecting into that.
And we need to spend more time talking about those kind of things, as well as making them available for the children we're teaching or the children in our families or even our adult children.
Mhm.
To take a look at a family gathering and say, we're going to have a rule about technology because we've all come together for this reunion so that we can spend time with each other. It's
Yeah.
likely because the Gen X and Gen Y are getting older and now we've got Gen A coming up, that we're just going to need to do that when we didn't need to 50 years ago.
So what do you see when it comes to, sticking with this spiritual side of things here? What is it that you see that God has built into us as kids, as adults, as his dearly loved creation, that we have that will help us to further combat the worldly view of technology that is trying to, in some ways, I don't want to turn this into what sounds like a spiritual battle, but I mean, come on, you know, Satan's not unaware of the lure of these sorts of things, and he's not above using them to create a little bit of gap and separation from us from God, because he knows that that's all he can do is offer those suggestions to hurt us through that. So what do you see in terms of what God has provided for us that we have at our disposal to be able to benefit us in this?
Well, being a psychologist, I always look at how God created the brain. So I start with that.
Yeah.
And I think one of the gifts that God gave us is our senses. That sense of smell and sight and touch, and even our interosenses, the senses that are inside, our emotions and the reactions that we feel. And so it doesn't surprise me when I read research that says if we want to reduce anxiety, we should spend more time in nature. And in fact, Gen X and Gen Y will say touch grass. And that's the exact way that they will describe that. Get outside, touch the grass, touch a tree, but experience that sensory information. Because if you're doing virtual reality, it's all coming in through the eyes and the ears. And that's shutting off the smells and the sense of touch
Mhm.
when God created our brains to do all of that at once. Um, God created us to be creative. You know, he didn't just make human beings to live in one way. If we look at the advances that humans have made since the time of creation, that's why we have technology now. God's made us creative, so he can lead us to these new things. So it doesn't surprise me that we're more likely to feel the sense of flow when we're engaging in the arts, when we're engaging in visual arts or with music or with writing, because again, we're using more parts of the brain in order to do that. So yeah, we're going to feel flow. And we should be aware of that and to be able to describe it. God created us to learn things through trial and error. He knew we're sinners, we're going to make mistakes. So he created forgiveness and he created emotions that help us to deal with making mistakes, and that becomes the way we learn something new. So if those kindergartners can't do trial and error with Legos, they're not going to be able to create new things later when they're engineering students. So the gift of play is very important, not just for children, but for all of us. And I see that in my students as they talk about, well, we just had fall break. And of course, you got a room full of type A honor students. They're planning on spending their fall break getting ahead on their homework. But
Mhm.
I hear them talking about doing play too, taking that time off too. We should be more aware of that. And if God created our brains to learn in fellowship, then community is something we really want to work on. And I think not only in schools, but in churches, we need to look at more how do we create community? It's wonderful to bring people on your campus, but how do you connect them? And how do you then connect them to the faith too? We're going to have to counteract this as a church. What's happening with technology, we're going to have to counteract it with fellowship because
And
that's
I
the
think
main
that
tool.
And I think that community concept is really just so critically important because with community comes the interaction and the learning about life through those shared experiences with people who are in some ways similar to us, but in some ways very different from us. You know,
Hmm.
if you ever read a novel or see a movie, the best characters are the ones that are complex.
Yeah.
You know, Superman is Superman, and that's great, but if you really think about it in terms of a character, Superman by himself, it's kind of boring
Hmm.
because you know what he's going to do, you know what he has to do. You know, Clark Kent is a little more interesting than
Hmm.
Superman because Clark Kent's got issues. He, he's got to deal with, galactic parents and this alter ego that he's got, and he's got Lois Lane and all the other
Yeah.
things. Where Superman, just you'll go fly someplace and beat the bad guy.
Right.
The greatest characters are those when I think you find yourself rooting for the guy who is the protagonist in the story, but he's not a good guy. Then you think about, some of those movies, like just The Godfathers to throw out one that would be
Hmm.
commonly known. You know, Michael Corleone is the protagonist. You're rooting for Michael Corleone. Is he a good guy? No, and there's all sorts of evidence to demonstrate quite clearly how not of a good guy he is, but yet you find yourself rooting for the bad guy. Character creates, or those different character traits create a character that becomes uh, someone you can relate to and connect with. Now, put that in the real life away from movies and books and TV. That's how you grow and learn too, because you get to see the interactions. You talked about it earlier, you know, with your husband now, an aspiring plumber, figuring out the leak in the sink, knowing that this isn't the end of the world.
Hmm.
I'm sure he has been tempted, if not, used a couple of times, a Google video just to see, well, how did somebody else do this so I can get a sense of
Oh
what I
yeah.
should be looking for, whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. But he's also taking the life experience that he has of a little drip under the sink is a challenge, not a crisis.
Hmm.
And we can manage the challenge until we figure out the solution. And once we've got that, then we feel that sense of accomplishment. those are all things that, as you've said, very much created in our lives through the interaction with other people. Because now I can hear in a story how God worked in someone's life, but if I know the person and I had the
Mhm.
chance to be a part of that through the conversation and the watching and the praying for that person, that's a whole nother level of connection, which is going to more deeply impact myself and be something I'm going to be more likely to rely upon when I find myself in that same place. And I, again, as you said, and I think very effectively, that's how God designed us. That was
Right.
intentional on his part to create us that way.
You want those experiences to go into your experience library so that you can pull them up again. Here's a great church example on fellowship. The pastor that we have now has a wonderful habit of when we've had a church meeting, and when you're in a church meeting is when you really find out that those people you worship with are different.
Yes, you do.
You can't believe that they think that we should do this and we think that we should do that. Our pastor always brings us together again after we voted and decided by singing the doxology. It's a simple thing, and I'm sure there's plenty of pastors all over that do that. But what's happening there is that we've had an experience where we pulled apart as individuals,
Mhm.
and then God pulls us back together again. And in Jonathan Haidt's book, and again, we're talking about someone who's not a faith-based person, he talks about something that's called collective effervescence. And Rich, this is my new favorite phrase because I
Oh.
just, as a kindergarten teacher, that word sounds like it needs glitter, doesn't it? Collective effervescence. But it's when people come together as a group and they do something that raises them up to a higher plane. And that's what we're doing there. When we sing the doxology, we are reminding each other of how God brings us together and how we're not just people on earth arguing over some little church thing. We're God's children adopted into his family. That's collective effervescence. And how can you feel anxious when you're in that situation?
That's wonderful. And again, I agree. That's definitely worth all the glitter and, or as some call it, satanic sand you can possibly use to pretty that up. All right. We could go on, but we should probably get this episode wrapped up. So Kim, if somebody wanted to reach out, connect, talk with you more about these things, how had some questions or just wanted to in general connect with you and the work that you're doing, what's the best way for them to do that?
They'll want to go to my website and to find that then they'll need to be able to spell my last name. So I'll go ahead and spell it. It's Marxhausen. But they can email me off of that, or they can connect with me on Facebook or on LinkedIn too. Those are two other good ways.
All right, and that email address is Kim at Marxhausen, as you just spelled it, .net.
.net is what you have to remember there. Yeah.
And again, we'll have that on the flyer as well. So if you're wanting to see it in print, we'll be able to provide that for you as well, so you can make that connection. Kim, as always, we are blessed when you grace us with your time and your knowledge. Blessings to you, blessings to your bathroom sink. Pray
Yes.
that that the drips are long gone and everything is going well there. And again, thank you for all that you're doing to support the work of our schools. We are blessed as a synod to have your involvement, and our teachers are learning great deals from you to be able to continue to serve the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. And I just love conversations with you, even though you don't like the right football team. But my favorite thing in life is to support the teachers who are out there in the trenches. And your organization, LSEM, just does a beautiful job of that.
Well, thank you. And again, we're honored to be able to serve in that capacity as well. So again, thank you to everyone who's listening. Again, we appreciate the time that you're taking to listen in. Feel free to offer up any comments or thoughts. If you have questions, again, we can connect those with you to Kim. And again, just thank you for the work that you're doing in the kingdom. You know, you may not see it on a day-to-day basis, but you are doing amazing things to be able to bring Christ into the lives of the children that you are serving. So on behalf of All of us here at LSCM, Dr. Kim Marxhausen, I'm Richard Schumacher. Thank you for your time and blessings on your day. You've been listening to the Lutheran Education Podcast, brought to you by Lutheran Special Education Ministries.
Thank you for listening. We'll meet you again in 2 weeks for the Lutheran Education Podcast. For more information about LSCM, go to our website at luthsped.org. You can follow us on X by going to www.x.com/LSCM1873 or on Facebook at facebook.com/LSCM1873. If you're on Instagram, you can find us by going to @LSCM1873. We'll meet you again in 2 weeks for the Lutheran Education Podcast. Did you enjoy today's podcast? Want to help get the word out? Please leave us a review on the app you're using to listen today.